Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to get the latest notifications. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. In a series of question of the day, I Mayank welcome you to another important topic. The topic in this video is about the center state relationship with respect to tax sharing. Now, why are we taking up this topic? It is important for us that after so many years of independence, we should be able to understand about the fiscal federal structure of our country. We are all aware about the layers of government and we know what the federal structure is. But at that point of time, it is also important that we understand this new term coined recently called fiscal federal structure, what it is, how it works, and what are the parameters in deciding about how center state should work with respect to tax sharing or the revenue system in the light of recent announcement of GST and how GST has actually made the process either simpler or complex. All these questions which I have told you and many more would be answered in the video ahead. So let's move on to the question of the day. The question of the day is, which of the following is true about Indian federal structure? So Indian federal structure is, by this I mean the federal structure of India where there are layers of government which actually coordinate with each other to run the country, and here in this video we are going to talk about the financial relations between them. First is cooperative federalism focuses on center and state working together collaboratively. So by this term, cooperative federalism, many of us would be thinking what this term basically means. Cooperative federalism, we can opine from this is basically a structure where the center and state work in coordination with each other, right? Next is fiscal federalism is based on the theory of federal structure. So this there is a theory. What is this theory all about? The next question. And in this, according to this some theory, the government is basically working in a fiscal structure using fiscal tools can help to solve the problems related to the financing of the country, basically how the income should be distributed and the taxation policy. Third is currently the GST revenue is apportioned between the state and center in the ratio 50 to 50. It is a fact which we must be knowing. Fourth is there has been a rise in the project specific grants. By project specific grants, I mean those grants which are specifically allocated to one single project or idea by the center has increased after the recommendation of the 14th Finance Commission. Those of us who wish to answer can pause the video and give the answers. Now let's move on to the video. So, but the question itself created a lot of new terms for some of us. Those of us who are not at all aware about what I am talking about, what is the federal structure, what do I mean by fiscal federalism? So there is some questions which I feel must be there in most of your mind. First is, what is fiscal federalism? Second question is theory behind the concept of fiscal federalism. So I'll explain and start this video by explaining this term only. Also, we noticed one more term in the question of the day, that was collaborative federalism. So we'll be explaining that in the video ahead. First is, what is fiscal federalism? So fiscal federalism is basically, we'll break it down. Federalism is basically the federal structure. So by this term fiscal federalism, I basically mean the federal structure of government where the layers of the government, that is the center, state, local, coordinate with each other using the tools of the government. Which tools? The tools is fiscal tools. So the layers of government coordinate with each other using the fiscal tools to run the economy of a country in a better manner. Now what do I mean by run the economy better? Basically they form policies related to economic stabilization and redistribution of income using these fiscal tools. So a structure where these layers of government together coordinate with each other using fiscal tools to form policies for stabilization of economy and redistribution of income, that kind of structure is fiscal federal structure. Now you must be thinking, okay, so if this is the structure, what is the reason behind it? Why do we need a center, a state and a local government and all these layers to do this work? Why can't we have just one single center who can coordinate all this? Or why can't the states take care of this on their own? Why do we need layers, or why do we need a structure in this? The answer is based on the theory for which this came. So the theory behind this was given by Richardson Margreave, and the person himself stated that the federal system of government can be efficient and effective at solving problems government face today So what kind of problems? I just told you: distribution of income, efficient and effective allocation of resources, and economic stability. So now the question which we just discussed: why do we need layers? We need layers because there has to be a division of work. See, if in a country like India there is some states who have, like UP, who have so much population and are producing more output, while there is a state which is not producing that output for the country because of the lower population or because of certain other reasons. So they we can't discriminate between the states of the country based on how the output they are producing, because there are many other factors also which we need to consider. So there has to be a center which is responsible to develop plans, that is to actually do the allocation of resources and develop plans, that is how the money has to be allocated between the states and how the schemes have to be planned, so that there is no interstate disparity and every state is allocated with funds needed for the welfare of people. Okay, fine enough. The center does the implement planning work. What the state does? The state actually you gets that fund. Once the state is given that fund, now the center cannot go to every house in that state and ask their problem and then allocate money to them. Now it is the role of center to actually use the money allocated state to actually use the money used by allotted by the center to use it in effective and innovative ways to solve the problem of the people. So it is the state which comes in the role, and the local level government supports the state in doing so. So it is a level structure where one center takes care that the states don't have any discrimination between them in terms of distribution of resources, while the state takes care of the allocation of resources. So it is at through this multi structured layer system that effective planning and implementation of taxation system using fiscal tools takes place. Now there has to be some benefits to it and some drawbacks. We need to analyze both to understand it. First, regional and local differences taken into account. We all know that since we live in a local area where supposedly we have an MLA or MP, so whenever there is a problem, the first person expected to know the best situation is the local leader. So you cannot expect the central government to know everything, or you cannot go to the central government for everything. So by entering into a structure where the state participates, it becomes helpful as the state leader or the local leader knows the problem in a better manner than the someone from outside. Second, competition among local government favors organizational and political innovations. So when states compete with each other with the idea that the center is keeping an eye on them, then the idea of competition is based on efficiency, that is how well a state works. There has been recently announcements about the state which has the cleanest roads or certain kind of awards which actually develop the culture of healthy competition and ultimately help in the welfare of the citizens. And also political innovations like developing new ideas, bringing in new ideas to solve the problem of the people. Third is lower planning and administrative cost. Very well explained sentence in its own sense, as when the center is not giving is not has to not to go every place on its own. That is, they don't have to send people. Rather, they can just coordinate with the state or the local level leaders and then solve the problem. So it lowers down their administrative cost. So then that way it is very helpful. Now. um let's talk about the drawbacks. So the drawbacks of fiscal federalism: firstly, unavailability of infrastructure of public expenditure at local level. So whenever you go to a state office, the chances of you having a good infrastructure is very less, because unlike the center, the state offices are not very well maintained. There are problems of electricity, or the staff is not problem of electricity, desk tables are not well maintained. In the same point, the third point also, I would like to add, because the lack of availability of qualified staff in a way complements the problem of infrastructure. So if you go in a state office where either there is no infrastructure, that is there is no electricity, the computers are not there, desks are not well maintained, and at the same time the person whom you are talking to is not qualified enough, or in a way is not trained enough to actually handle all the problem. So it kind of creates a red tape escapism ideology, and people desist that because of the long queues and the inefficient behavior of the employees. So there has been a questions to improve the efficiency of government employees in such state organizations. Now, last is a certain degree of independence to the local government from national government. Now, I have put it in a drawback because more than a good, it is a good thing as well, because now the state and can use their own ideas to do the work in welfare of people. However, the bigger fact is that most of the time, because of political discrepancy or political gimmicks, the state leaders don't feel the right, don't wish to support the center. So at this point of time, the one who is losing the game is not the political parties but the citizen, as the welfare is hampered. So it is important that the we analyze the drawbacks also to understand the idea of fiscal federal structure in a better manner. Now, we are talking a lot about it. We have discussed what it is. We have discussed the theory, good points, bad points. But why it started? Like, why do we need a fiscal structure where the center is at the top layer and then allocating funds to state? So it all started in the imperial government. So when the British used to rule India, there were governors who were the prime ministers of the country. Now, when these prime ministers used to reside in the center, and the government or the British government felt that they were low on funds, so they forced the local provincial rulers to send a large chunk of their taxes collected by them from the in the form of revenue to the center. This idea laid down the basis of the states collecting taxes and contributing their share towards the central government. Now, as this country progressed, even after independence, the same process followed, and the act which the British put in the form of Government of India Act 1935 was enacted as it is in our constitution. So there were no major changes, and the idea of states providing funds to center remained the same even in our own economy. However, after independence, the change in the picture was that states started demanding money. Earlier, the states were forced to pay money and nobody could question the British. But now, the states wanted the center to be accountable and allot them the money or give them a good share, because they wanted money to help or to work on the welfare of people. Now, every time a state government cannot wait for the center to allot funds, it need to have its own budget. Therefore, they started asking the center to give them money. So then after that, because of continuous demands, a constitution amendment was made in the 80th constitution amendment, and was done by the recommendation of the finance commission. What this amendment stated, it stated that earlier only personal income tax collected by the center was shareable with the state, but now all other taxes also were shared, has to be shared with the state, except two: cess and surcharge. These two terms are going to play a very important role in the video ahead, so remember that. Cess and surcharge would not be included as a provision or as a income source of income for states. Now we understand the history, but what the present situation is, we to in order to understand that, we have to come back to our definition. In the question of the day, we talked about cooperative federalism. So cooperative federalism is a concept which reflect relationship between center and state, where both come together and resolve common problem with each other's cooperation. So there has been a cooperation between the center and state, which in itself means that the center and state are at the same level. It is a horizontal structure. It is not the center is ordering the state to do so. It is the center and state are cooperating with each other, helping each other to achieve the goals. So nobody is above anyone. It is the both are the same at the same footing. Now, we discuss cooperative federalism. We know what was the constitutional amendment. We kind of get an idea that okay, center has to provide a major chunk of its shares of the revenue generated through taxes to the state, except to cess and surcharge. But are we actually following that? Are we actually having a center state good relationship which we are talking about to help our country grow? To understand that, we have four parameters. These four parameters are basically the parameters or the ways in which tax has been collected. We use these parameters to understand the pattern of sharing between the center and state. First is trends in tax revenue. A look at the composition of the center and state owned taxes and expenditure reveal that the share of the own tax revenue and expenditure of the state is 38% and 58% respectively. Why? The statement which I just said has simple meaning that in terms of the total revenue generated, that is whatever revenue the state have generated, their share of that revenue is 38% while their share in the expenditure is 58%. Now this discrepancy between the two does not end here. There is a proper table which I have presented to you to understand it better. I'll explain what is there on the screen. First is a table which shows that state owned source and state share in the expenditure percentage of total. Now, what I mean is, out of the total expenditure of the country and out of the total revenue generated by the country. So, out of the total revenue generated by a country in a year, supposingly a country generates 100 rupees in a year. Out of this, only 37.5% is the one amount which goes to the state. So state earns only 37.5% of the total revenue. So if the country generates 100 rupees, the state is allotted only 37.5 rupees for its expenditure. However, this expenditure which they incur is 60%. That is, out of the total expenditure of the country, 60% is borne by the states. So if a state, or if on an average a state is getting a share in the money or income is only 37.5%. However, the expenses which they incur or which have to bear is 60%. There is a huge discrepancy between what they are being allotted and what they should be allotted. So this is a percentage of the total expenditure and revenue. The second table talks about the percentage of the total GDP. So if the total GDP of a country is supposedly 100 rupees, so the 100 rupees is the total GDP. Out of this total GDP, the revenue generation by the government, which is both center and state together, is 20.5%. So 20.5% is the revenue generated by is the contribution in the revenue generation. However, the expenditure of the government comes down to 27%. So you can see that 27% is the total expenditure, and in this total expenditure by all both the center and the state government, 18% belongs to state. Now, in order to help you not to confuse between the two, remember first one talks about, this is the first one, this one talks about percentage of total, that is the total revenue and the total expenditure. So if a country's total revenue is rupees 100, what is the share of the expenditure is we are talking about here. Here the idea of percentages is in terms of GDP. So here we are talking about GDP. So the total revenue generation by both center and state is 20.5 and expenditure is 27%, and out of this expenditure 18% belongs to state. Now here an important fact which I want to bring in your notice, that as per the recommendation of the 14th Finance Commission, a state the center has to provide 42% of the total revenue generated by the center in the year to the states. Now 42% of the total revenue generated by the center to the state except cess and surcharge is to be provided by the center to the state. Okay, so if the center, and this 20.5% is the cumulative percentage of revenue generated by the center and the state together as a percentage of GDP. So this 20.5% is the ratio or the value at which the center and state combined have earned. And out of this 20.5%, 42% of the revenue has to be provided by the center to the state except the cess and surcharge. Now, if you get this, now understand the second aspect, that if 18% is the expenditure to be borne, what is the total expenditure? 27%. And what is the expenditure by state? 18%. So around 65% of the total expenditure. Now tell me one thing, if you combine these two figures, you have an income of 20.5%. That is, you are getting 42% of 20.5% of GDP, which is around an amount of 40, which sums to around 42%. So if you are getting a revenue of 42%, but your expenditure is 65%, 42 and 65, again a discrepancy. So we prove it by first and by the second table that there is a discrepancy, or there is a huge gap between the in revenue generated and the expenditure, both in terms of the percentage of the total revenue as well as in terms of the percentage of GDP. Moving to the second point, transfer of central resources. What do you mean by transfer of central resources? So transfer of central resources basically means that the central resources which the center provides can be classified into two: general purpose transfer and specific purpose transfer. But firstly, what are these resources? These resources basically are the money which the center allots to the state in form of grants. So these grants is something else from the taxes. Now we are coming to the point number 2, or the second parameter, which is the grants. The grants says that there are two type of grant: general purpose grant and specific purpose grant. What are general purpose transfer? General purpose transfers are those transfer which are provided by the center to the state, and state has the discretion to use those funds based on their thinking or their choices. So state can use it any way which it want to for the benefit of people. That is, it decides what the problem is and how much fund is to allocate it. All depends on the state. Now if state and the cabinet minister of the state have the power, though they will use it in a manner which they feel right. What all covered under this? So all the tax devolution and post devolution revenue, that is all the revenue which is provided through taxation, comes under this, so which is the general purpose transfer. However, there is a specific purpose transfer. What does this say? This basically is the grant which is provided by the center to the state to meet certain specific needs. For example, in case of Swachh Bharat, if I am the center, you are the state, and your state toilets are not there, so if I allot you specific grants for toilet, then it means you can use that only to build toilets. You cannot use it to provide electricity to people or for any other welfare. You have to use it for the same purpose, and there are conditions attached to it. So these are the two type of grants, and these are the center's resources which they provide to the state. You can see on your table that the general purpose transfers have been 3.63, 3.61 going to 4.61. That is on a rise from 2011 till 2018, while the specific purpose transfer which we told were for a project or for a scheme or we just discussed are on a decline, that is 1.97 to 1.80. So we can see that okay, the good part is that now the center is not bird pestering the state to use the fund specifically. We can say that yes, state are being provided more and more autonomy to use the funds in their own discretion. Next point or next parameter is trends in tax devolution. Now, it is important for us to clarify before we move forward what we did. We were analyzing the factors of tax division, which was basically about the trends in tax revenue. We discussed that what is the ratio of tax revenue, that is, what is the ratio of the expenditure and the revenue generated in terms of total as well as a percent of GDP in the country. Second was how the grants are being used and what has been a change in the pattern of grants, that is general and specific grants. Now we are talking about tax devolution. Tax devolution is the revenue or the distribution of income between the state and center. Remember, we talked about two factors, cess and surcharge. Now these cess and surcharge play a very important role in this point. How? I'll explain. What this point says that there has been a case where that the constitution does not permit the cess and surcharge collected by the center to be shared by the with the state. All other taxes has to be shared by the center with the state. Now what percentage will the state get? This depends on the recommendation of finance commission, and from 11th till 14th the proceeds which they have got has been like 29.5% were earlier allotted to states, then it came 30.5, then it rose to 32%, and in the 14th finance commission 42% was asked by the center to the state to be provided. Now we understand that okay, so it means that whatever the taxes the central government has, except these two, 42% of the tax has to be provided by the center to the state. But there has been a problem which we need to understand. What the problem is, supposingly there is a case 1. Here the case was that a country is earning 100 rupees in the form of tax revenue. Out of this, 90 is from other taxes and 10 is from cess and surcharge. So this 90 which is in the box is the distributable part. However, this part of 10 is not distributable. So out of this 90 which is the distribution part, 32% was the earlier rate has to be provided. So 27.18% was the share the states were getting. Now what happened later on, that after the percentage rose to 42%, there was expectation that there would be a rise in the amount that the states are getting. Definitely, if I say that you are getting 32% of 90, later on I raise it to 42%, so you are getting more funds, which will help, as we discussed in the previous cases, to meet the expenditure which were way above than the revenue. So what happened was was 42% to be provided. Now 90s 42% of 90 is 36.18%, right? But what is written here? It is not 36.18, it is something 32.16, which is slightly less. You know why it happened? It happened because 80% was the base. 80% was the base. It was not 90. Now what happened? Why it became 80? It became 80 because the revenue, although the government's revenue remains same, the cess and surcharge, which are not shareable with the state, rose while the other taxes reduced. So since the earning from the other taxes reduced and cess and surcharge increased, the ratio of making the 100, which was earlier 90 is to 10, that is 90 other taxes and 10 the cess and surcharge, shifted to 80 is to 2, that is 80 the other taxes and 10 20 became the cess and surcharge. So as a result of this, despite increasing the share of state getting the from the pool, that is 42% in place of 32%, the total money which they got no doubt improved from the previous situation, but could have been better had there been this 90, not 80. Right? So what I mean to say is that despite an increase in the share of state, the total pool of the money has shrunk down or has been reduced, and cess and surcharge has increased, which neutralizes or in a way reduce the impact which could have been created had the states got the percentage from the other taxes. Now, we I hope that we understand how this cess and surcharge case provides an important fact of devolution and how it affects the state. Last is post GST scenario. Now, after GST has been implemented, there were some problems. What this parameter talks about is, we all know GST actually was a tax implemented which subsumed many other taxes and made one tax as compulsory tax all across the nation and removed those octroi or those charges which different state used to implement in different manner. Now, there was some negative impact in terms of state revenue. What was the negative impact? 44% of the state revenue which were earlier earned through these taxes like VAT, octroi and all those was removed or was subsumed under its GST. So what happened is that I being the state and you are the center, I was earning 40, a good amount, and 44% of my amount now goes to you. And what happens to your income? Only 28% of your sources of income or the taxes which you from which you were earning was subsumed under GST. So who is at a loss? My 44% income is gone to you, and your only 28% income is under GST. So you are earning definitely more than me. In such situation, what the state commission or the GST council recommended, that since the states are at losses because 44% of their earlier revenue which used to come from VAT and these octroi charges are now subsumed under GST, so we need to provide them a cushion or a reimbursement in the form of providing them money of in a major share. So it was recommended that 60 to 40 should be the share between the center and state, that is out of the total GST revenue, 60% should be provided to the state and 40 should be with the center. However, currently this is 50 to 50, because of which many states are at losses. Now, what the center has to say on this is that this will has increased tax base. Now, earlier people could evade taxes and use methods to evade tax, but now GST is such a complex and such a good for reform that people cannot evade taxes, and this has led to increase in tax base. Now, what will happen is, since tax base has increased, the revenue increases, and the percentage to be shared with the state would automatically increase. So in the short run, they might think that the state is at losses because now they are earning less, but in long run they are going to earn more. This is what center has countered or has said about it. So this was all about the parameters which we have discussed. Now I would like to end with some likely steps. I hope you understood that how the federal structure work and what are the four parameters and how tax has been allocated. These two likely steps would help you to understand how we can move better. First is, shareable tax pool must also include cesses and surcharge as these increase sharply. We just saw the 90s to 10 was moved to 80 is to 20. So we see that by not including cess and surcharge, we are at loss and we can have better impact. So this should be included is the first recommendation. Second, we can use a method which is similar to US and Canada, but remember, blindly following their structure is not the right way, because in those states, US and Canada, states are the main holders. They have come together to form a nation. But in our country, the central government came first and then they decided to empower the state government. So there has been a different structure and we cannot blindly follow their structure where states control everything. We need to have a both a balanced view. Now, coming back to the question of the day, I hope I could help you understand the video and help you understand the federal structure. So, out of these, which is true? First, cooperative federalism focuses on center and state working together collaboratively. Yes, we clearly saw that both work together. Second, fiscal federalism is based on the theory of federal structure of government using fiscal tools. Yes, we discussed in the beginning only fiscal federalism is basically layers of government working together using fiscal tools to meet the fiscal problems like economic stabilization and putting out effective allocation of resources and using allocation effective use of resources and deciding a rate. Third is currently the GST revenue is apportioned between the center and state in the ratio 50 to 50. Yes, this might be a question in your mind. Remember, 60 is to 40 is the recommended ratio. However, currently 50 is to 50 is the ratio of GST revenue between center and state. Lastly, there has been a rise in the project specific grants to state by the center. Remember the second point where we discussed that specific grants are on a decline while the general grants are on a rise. So first, second, and third is correct, but the fourth is incorrect. So this was the answer. Hope you liked the video and could explain you the concept better and you could understand it in a better manner. For such enriching videos, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.